Pretty soon, there'll be a large group of people in the know who were never supposed to know. But you won't know, except you're hearing it here. You won't know when. Your only warning sign will be a rapidly rising gold price without any apparent reason. There'll be no accompanying story. No wars, no surge in inflation, no default. But the question is still when. Well, the button's likely to be pushed when the economy needs a stimulus. Or it could be pushed when some emergency action is needed due to some event, such as a Liz Truss moment. Liz Truss moment in the UK was a bond crisis, a gilt crisis, so it might be a crisis in the US Treasury market. It is possible that silver could go to this figure literally overnight. And how is that possible? Well, I'm going to explain to you how this could happen. But let's start with a catalyst. What's the catalyst for such a move? So the real problem that we have with the United States at the moment is the huge value of the debt. There's a massive amount of debt coming due in the next 4 years, which has to be rolled over at much higher interest rates than previously. This can't continue indefinitely. It's not possible to continue taking on debt indefinitely without any consequences. Something has to be done. Let's look at something which is being considered by the United States, and that is the revaluation of gold. And I'm going to talk about that and why we see it. So let's start with the position of Secretary to the Treasury in the United States. It's the most important position in the country when it comes to the managing the finances of the United States. Based on the amount of money being managed, it's a position which is many times more important than Jerome Powell's position as head of the Federal Reserve. Secretary of the Treasury is literally the most important position in the United States when it comes to finance.
In January 2025, Scott Bessent was sworn in as U.S. Treasury Secretary, taking over from Janet Yellen. His role, far more critical than even the Federal Reserve Chair, places him in direct control of America's financial lifeline. Just days into his position, he made a cryptic but telling statement. "We are going to monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet for the American people." Most analysts believe he was pointing at one thing: gold. The United States holds over 261 million ounces, but still values it at just $42.22 per ounce, a relic of 1970s law.
So Scott Bessent is the current Secretary to the Treasury. He succeeded Janet Yellen. Scott Bessent was sworn in as Secretary to the Treasury on January the 28th, 2025 this year. A few days later, in his new position as Secretary of the Treasury, he said the following words, and I quote, "We're going to monetize the asset side of the US balance sheet for the American people." Now, what does that mean? Well, for those who understand what the balance sheet is and what the assets are, there's one asset he must be talking about, at least everybody thinks so, and that is the most liquid and the most undervalued asset on the Treasury's balance sheet. And that asset is 261.5 million ounces of gold, which is valued by the Treasury at the statutory price of $42.22. That's a price which was set by law in 1972. So those 261.5 million ounces at $42.22 are worth $11 billion.
At today's statutory price, America's gold stash is officially worth only $11 billion, an absurd undervaluation. But if priced at current market levels near $3,300 an ounce, it would generate nearly $863 billion in new financial firepower. Yet even that wouldn't cover the 2025 budget deficit. That's why policymakers may consider something bolder: a dramatic gold revaluation. Just as Franklin Roosevelt did in 1934, when he confiscated private gold and raised its price by 69% overnight, the Treasury could reprice its reserves. This would unlock trillions without selling a single ounce, effectively rewriting the nation's financial playbook.
So the questions everybody's asking, and I'll come back to all these questions shortly, but I'll read the questions out. 1. When will it happen? 2. What will be the new gold price? 3. How will it happen? 4. Will they take my gold, just like they did in 1933? Will they confiscate it? Don't forget, 1934, 1 year after they confiscated people's gold, they raised the price from $20 to $35 an ounce, an increase of 69% in one night. How will it affect the price of silver and other precious metals? Now that's what you want to hear about, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you how I get to my $184 price. Will it cause a collapse of the currency and massive inflation? So I'm going to break these questions down for you one by one. Let's start with the first question. When will it happen? Well, there's not going to be any official warning. Those who are in the know will be sworn to secrecy. However, as is always the case, there will be many people involved in the planning, and the secret is bound to leak out. Someone will tell their partner will tell their dad, the dad will tell his mates at the next barbecue, and so on. And of course, dad's mates are all going to pile into gold.
If such a revaluation happens, don't expect a warning. Secrets of this scale never remain sealed, but they spread informally. A partner whispers to a relative, a friend mentions it at a barbecue, and suddenly gold demand surges for no obvious reason. The real sign will be unexplained jumps in gold prices, absent of war, inflation spikes, or defaults. The trigger could be a crisis, such as a meltdown in the U.S. Treasury bond market, similar to the Liz Truss moment in the UK. With America's fiscal stability in question, the gold button may be pushed unexpectedly.
Pretty soon, there'll be a large group of people in the know who were never supposed to know. But you won't know, except you're hearing it here. You won't know when. Your only warning sign will be a rapidly rising gold price without any apparent reason. There'll be no accompanying story. No wars, no surge in inflation, no default. But the question is still when. Well, the button's likely to be pushed when the economy needs a stimulus. Or it could be pushed when some emergency action is needed due to some event, such as a Liz Truss moment. Liz Truss moment in the UK was a bond crisis, a gilts crisis, so it might be a crisis in the US Treasury market.
Speculation is rampant on what price Washington might choose. Some analysts forecast astronomical numbers, $50,000 or even $150,000 per ounce, enough to theoretically erase the national debt. But such extremes could destabilize global markets. A more realistic figure discussed is $15,000 per ounce, nearly 5 times today's price. At that level, the Treasury could generate around $3.9 trillion, enough to wipe out the deficit, reduce debt, and still maintain a surplus. A $20,000 revaluation would add over $5 trillion, but the risks grow higher with each jump. Choosing the right price is a delicate balancing act.
The second question is, what will be the new gold price? Well, we've heard all kinds of figures from the current price of $3,300 all the way up to $150,000. The most popular quoted figure is $20,000 an ounce. I have my reason to think that's probably going to be a little bit too high. I think the figure will be $15,000 an ounce. It's a guess. I don't have inside information. But $15,000 is about 4.5 times higher than today's price of $3,300. Now, each price has its pros and its cons. But any price, from the present price of $3,300 all the way up to the highest possible figure, is going to create a profit for the Treasury, and it's also going to create a lot of newly printed cash for the Treasury if it's done right, yet allowing the Treasury to keep the gold. And I'm going to describe in a minute how, with a little bit of accounting magic, the Treasury can create trillions of dollars of newly spendable money, which can eliminate the budget deficit for the next 2 years, can reduce government debt, and allow the Treasury to keep its gold. And that absolutely is possible. So we'll just look at how much cash will be created for the Treasury depending on what price they choose for the revalued price of gold. Now, if they choose to revalue it from the $42.22 statutory price to today's price of $3,300, very roughly. I mean, that might be a bit more, a bit less when you watch this. But that's the price today, 1st of August 2025.
If gold undergoes a revaluation, silver will not be left behind. Historically, when gold has surged due to monetary resets, silver has delivered even more dramatic gains. Some analysts project that silver could rocket to $184 per ounce almost overnight if gold is revalued to $15,000. Beyond price action, this would trigger ripple effects across global markets. Currencies could weaken, inflation could spike, and investor psychology would fundamentally shift. Precious metals, long dismissed as relics, would suddenly stand at the center of global finance. For those paying attention, the window to prepare may be closing fast.
If they valued $3,300, the revaluation would create around $863 billion for the Treasury. Now, that might sound a lot of money, but unfortunately it's not even enough to pay off this year's budget deficit, so it won't go very far in reducing the debt at all. Let's take another price, this time $15,000 an ounce. Now that's the price I'm thinking of. Now that would generate $3.9 trillion. That's enough money to pay off this year's budget deficit, turn it into a surplus, and also make a surplus next year. And it would be enough to pay off maturing debt over the 6 to 9 months, so government debt would go down. But some people say, well, why not? Why $15,000? Why stop there? Why not $150,000, which would generate $39 trillion, and that would be enough to repay the whole of the national debt. There's a little problem with that because the national debt has maturity dates, and until it matures, you can't pay it off. But it's a fair comment. Why not $150,000? But in my case, I'm going to go for the $15,000 an ounce. I'm not against the most popular number of $20,000, which would generate $5.2 trillion, but I find that figure a little bit adventurous, and it might have unintended consequences. So that's why I've gone for a slightly lower level of $15,000 an ounce.